And if you could, we did have the discussion about how you want to deal with your evidence. And Chair, given the nature of the evidence, the General had indicated that in some instances he will read into the record, but when it comes to the more intricate aspects of illicit drugs, illegal mining, and that he would want to explain and give the Commissioner some practical examples as well, with the use of some photographs that he has provided to the Commission, but did not want it to be part of his statement, but will be included as exhibits later on. Thank you, Chair. General, you may then start on page 1 at paragraph 1, and please, if you want to read, you can read, and then where you want to explain, please do so, or elaborate.
Thank you, Commissioners. I am a Major General in the South African Police Service, attached to the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, known as the DPCI or Hawks, as the component head for serious organised crime investigation, based at the head office in Silverton, Pretoria. In 1993, I obtained a National Diploma in Police Administration from Technikon SA. In 2007, I obtained a Baccalaureus Technologia in Forensic Investigation, a Magister Technologia MTech in Forensic Investigation from UNISA in 2010, and a postgraduate diploma in Business Management from the Northwest University Business School in 2023. I joined SAPS on 1 January 1989. By then it was known as the South African Police Force. In September 1990, I was attached to the Diamond and Gold branch in Klerksdorp, which later became known as the Precious Metals and Diamond Unit, where I performed duties as an investigator and later as a team leader. This unit was eventually incorporated into the South African Police Service Organised Crime Unit. On 20 February 2009, the DPCI was established, incorporating the SAPS Organised Crime Unit. I have been with the DPCI since its inception. In October 2016, I was appointed Cluster Coordinator for the Detective Service in Phokeng, managing and overseeing the detectives within that district. I held the rank of Colonel at the time. This appointment was within the greater SAPS, so it was not within the DPCI. I was responsible for coordinating all investigations within the cluster, including inspections and attending to serious crime scenes. Commissioner, when I refer to serious crime scenes, it inter alia includes murder cases, serious robberies, house robberies, etc. That's happening on a regular basis within that space. On the 1st of January 2019, I was promoted to Brigadier and appointed as the Provincial Commander for Serious Organised Crime Investigation, or SOC in brackets, within the DPCI in the Northwest Province, and I was based in Klerksdorp. As the Provincial Commander, I was responsible for managing and overseeing the activities of the Serious Organised Crime Investigation units within the province. By then, it's now Lieutenant General Mbotu was the provincial head responsible for all components in the DPCI. So by then, Lieutenant General Mbotu was a Major General. On the 1st of September 2024, I was appointed to my current position as Component Head for Serious Organised Crime Investigation within the DPCI nationally. I currently report to Lieutenant General Mbotu, who is the DPCI Divisional Commissioner, National Priority Offences Operations.
Sorry, General, just before you proceed with that, there was an aspect that I canvassed with you in preparation for your evidence, which is not contained in your statement, but may be relevant to deal with it here in reference to General Mbotu. You will recall, you say that you started on the 1st of September 2024. General Mbotu gave evidence before the Commission about a takedown operation that had been undertaken on the 6th of December 2024 at Mr. Katiso Molefe's residence. and he said that you were one of the component heads that he had inquired from as to whether your unit was conducting any operations in the Sandton area. I just want you to address that and confirm and give us your version of what you can recall if you did in fact have that discussion with General Mboto.
Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, indeed, I confirm the inquiry that was made by General Mboto. By then, on that specific date, we were at the Excellence Awards of the DPCI. I was approached by the General and he made inquiries with me, and I denied that any of my personnel are involved in any operation at Mr. Molefe's residence.
And do you recall what General Mboto had specifically asked you? Did he tell you why he was asking you if your troops were involved in an operation in Sandton?
No, I didn't receive any detail, Commissioners.
Okay, so you weren't aware that it had related to an allegation that there were perhaps people that were imitating Hawks members at the residence, that was the allegation. He didn't tell you about that.
I cannot recall that per se, Commissioners, but what I know for a fact is by that time there was a number of incidents where members of the public would impersonate them to be members of the DPCI and then take part in raids at premises, etc., and indicate that they are DPCI members. That I can confirm.
Okay. And then for my curiosity, it seems that you were reporting to General Mboto in the Northwest, and then when you move in September 2024 to head office, he either moves subsequent to that or just before that, if memory serves me right. Did he have any part in your moving to head office?
No, Commissioner. The General by then, when I got promoted to head office from the 1st of September 2024, the General Mboto was by then still the provincial head of the DPCI Northwest. And so I arrived in head office before him.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, General. You may then continue at paragraph 6. In addition, you now dealing with the other components within the DPCI, operational components.
Thank you, Commissioners. In addition to the SOCI component headed by myself, the DPCI has the following operational components. It is the serious commercial crime component, then we have the serious corruption investigations, and then 2 operational support components. They do not carry dockets or execute arrests. They provide operational support to the operational components, the 3 major components. And they are the forensic accounting investigations, as well as the priority crime specialized investigations. And I've also mentioned in the statement who is the current acting component heads or appointed component heads within that space.
Both have the name or as part of the name investigations. That seems to suggest that they would carry dockets. Why do they have investigations in the name?
Well, although they are intimately involved with investigations, Commissioners, they do not carry the dockets. The dockets are being carried by either detectives within the serious organized crime space, serious corruption space, or serious commercial crime space. So they are rendering a support with, for instance, expert evidence that normal organized crime detectives are not capable of performing. So they assist us within that space.
Thank you, General. 6.4?
And then 6.4, Commissioners, it deals with, we also have the Tactical Operations Management section, known as TOMS, which is not technically a component. They report directly to the Divisional Commissioner, and they are headed by Brigadier Mokoena.
Thank you, General. Just a question for clarification. It seems to me that you have serious commercial crime, you have serious corruption investigations, you have serious organized crime. Is there ever an overlap in respect of one particular matter where all three are involved in a crime, for example? And how do you navigate that?
Indeed, Commissioners, the nature of the investigations that we are conducting tends towards overlapping, because organized crime can, for instance, never take place without corruption. So there's always that corruption element, and then in terms of then subsequent money laundering activities, obviously it goes hand in hand with fraud, and that then includes the commercial space. So it is, there's always that overlap. And we address that by means of a multidisciplinary, multidimensional approach where we rope in all the necessary resources to be effective with an investigation.
General, you said something now that organized crime never happens without corruption. Is that your opinion or in your experience? That organized crime, there's always an element of corruption involved. And what do you specifically mean by corruption?
Commissioners, by the nature of organized crime, there needs to be enabling factors that allows organized crime to flourish. In order for that to happen, it's my experience that there is always an element of corruption involved in the perpetuating of these crimes.
And by that you mean corruption within what, government spheres? What kind of corruption?
Both private and public space, Commissioners.
Okay. Then, General, if we can go to paragraph 7.
I consider myself to be a career detective. Before my promotion to component head, I had an active role in investigating serious organized crime in the Northwest. These days, my role is more strategic than operational. I am responsible for maintaining policy and standards applicable to the SARCI component nationally. I also monitor the performance of serious organized crime investigation units nationally and guide and oversee investigations within this space.
Can I just understand the oversee investigations aspect of it? You have your investigator and you the component head nationally. So how do you oversee an investigation? For example, let's take the matter that you're going to be testifying about. What is your role in that? Because I'm mindful of the fact that there could be elements of interference where, as a head, you may interfere in an investigation, but it is labeled overseeing. So I just want to understand, are there parameters, guidelines into how you exercise your oversight role?
Commissioners, let me first indicate that within my space at the head office, I have investigating capacity within all 4 of the sections at the head office. So that enables my office to, for instance, take over certain investigations where there's problems, for instance, or where a province is not having the necessary capacity to deal with certain investigations. So it's not something strange for my office to receive a directive to oversee or to take over in its totality an investigation. In terms of the Port Shepstone matter, that investigation was taken over by my component shortly after the incident in 2021.
Your component, but at that time you weren't the head in 2021.
That's correct, Commissioner. By then, Major General Kana was heading the serious organized crime investigation component.
You would have heard Advocate Sello saying that there had been some significant developments in the investigation over the past 12 or so months in this matter. So you're saying that this investigation started in 2021 after the theft, November 2021,
I confirm that, Commissioners.
and developments only, it was only real developments or significant developments, as she said, after your appointment as component head. Is that coincidental?
Well, Commissioner, I don't know if it's coincidental, but I can confirm that there is substantial progress on the investigation subsequent to my appointment. I can confirm that.
And can I ask, this investigation, you said it was taken over by your component. Where was it before that, before it was taken over?
Commissioners, immediately after the housebreaking was detected, the burglary at the Port Shepstone Serious Organised Crime Investigation Unit, the matter was left with the Detective Service at Port Shepstone. Shortly thereafter, a decision was taken by the then DPCI head, Lieutenant General Lebia, to establish a team to investigate the matter, and then the responsibility to oversee that investigation, or the investigation by then, was placed on Major General Kana, who has overseen it from then until he went on retirement by the end of August 2024, and I took up office on the 1st of September 2024.
Thank you, General. You may continue at paragraph 8.
The primary purpose of this statement is to give evidence regarding the November 2021 theft of cocaine from police custody in Port Shepstone. However, I will traverse other related topics to give the Commission the necessary context to understand the events that transpired in Port Shepstone.
Okay, we then move on to a new topic, serious organized crime investigations. You may continue from paragraph 9.
Thank you, Commissioners. As stated earlier, I was the Provincial Commander for Soki in Klerksdorp Northwest, and thereafter promoted to Component Head for Soki nationally. In order to understand what Soki entails, it's important to understand what is considered a serious organized crime. Serious organized crime is coordinated, structured, and ongoing criminal conduct carried out by criminal groupings involving serious offences which, by reason of their scale, sophistication, or societal impact, fall within the category of national priority offences contemplated in Section 17D of the South African Police Service Act, Act 68 of 1995. Serious organized crime is a subset of national priority crime referred to in Section 17D of the SAPS Act.
You may continue.
According to the DPCI's mandate, the Soki component includes, and this is just examples, it's not an all-inclusive list, Commissioner, national priority violent crimes, such as cash-in-transit robberies and trafficking in firearms or explosives, both transnationally and nationally, by organized crime networks. Then the second section is the South African Narcotics Enforcement Bureau, commonly known as SANEP, which deals with all national and transnational drug trafficking offences, detection and dismantling of all clandestine drug laboratories, and other drug-related crimes. Then the third section there is the Economic Protected Resources section, which investigates offences relating to transnational importing of non-ferrous metals and tampering with essential infrastructure in organised, complex and sophisticated cases, transnational importing and exporting of precious metals, diamonds and chrome, illegal mining committed in an organised fashion, wildlife trafficking, and then human trafficking linked to organised criminal groups or committed in an organised fashion by land, sea, or air.
General, Human trafficking falls under economic protected resources. Why is that?
Commissioner, I don't want it to be misleading because it's as if it adds value economically, but it's all about the exploitation of the victims of trafficking in persons, whether it is for slave labor or for purposes of prostitution or other reasons. The reason why it's under economic protected resource is because of the exploitation of the victims. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, General. May I continue?
And then the fourth section within the component is the crimes against the state component, which investigate crimes like, for instance, high treason, terrorism, terror financing, etc.
Okay. Then at paragraph 12, you deal with the prevalence of these various crimes in the different provinces.
The order of prevalence of these crimes will differ from province to province. In the Northwest, illegal mining, illicit drugs, and firearm trafficking are the most prevalent. In Gauteng, illicit drugs, precious metals and diamonds, firearms and ammunition, and cash-in-transit heists are the most prevalent. In KwaZulu-Natal, illicit drugs, CIT, and non-ferrous metals crimes are the most prevalent. And in the Western Cape, with specific reference to Cape Town, illicit drugs, marine life crimes, firearms and ammunition, and gangsterism-related offences are the most prevalent. In an attempt to give the Commission context to how sophisticated organised crime can be, and given that I spent the majority of my career in the Northwest, the best way is to deal briefly with illegal mining in the Northwest Province. The police officials in the Northwest are faced with large-scale criminality by heavily armed criminal groupings conducting illegal mining activities at redundant mining sites or inadequately secured mine shafts. The illegal mining activities are conducted under the control or direction of organized groups or networks who regulate access to mining sites, coordinate the extraction of material, and control its onward movement.
Sorry, General, before you continue to the next paragraph, can you just give us examples of what you refer to as heavily armed?
Thank you, Commissioners. It happened that this illegal mining groupings that get illegal access to mine shafts, both underground and to protect it on surface, are armed with automatic rifles, with pistols, revolvers, and in some instances we even found hand grenades. At some of the scenes we will recover in excess of 10 or more rifles from the perpetrators, as well as sufficient ammunition to continue with a firefight for at least 24 hours. In one instance, we recovered only AK-47 ammunition, 6,000 rounds of ammunition. It goes without saying that it shows us how well equipped these criminals are within the organized crime space. They have logistics, supply chain streams that provide them with food, as well as gold refining paraphernalia that they use both underground and on surface. And then there is always visible and available market to facilitate the onward trafficking with subsequent money laundering that's taking place on a continuous and ongoing basis.
Thank you, General. Paragraph 15?
13.
15.
The extracted material is transported from the mining sites to informal or unlawful processing operations, or introduced into legitimate processing streams. By this, I mean the material is sold to a legitimate refining or processing company with a refining license. I would like to make it clear, Commissioners, that this is not everybody within that industry or all the companies. There are unscrupulous license holders, but there are also honest companies within that space. The material is sold through intermediaries and may ultimately be refined or exported. The proceeds generated from such activities are often handled in cash or through informal channels, which obscures the origin of the material and the financial flows associated with it. Gold is a high-value commodity that can be transported and concealed with relative ease. Once refined, it is generally indistinguishable from lawfully mined gold, which facilitates its integration into legitimate markets. This makes it difficult to trace the origin of the material. The continued demand for gold and other minerals, both locally and internationally, contributes to the persistence of illegal mining activities. Refineries and processors could acquire the illegal material through intermediaries or suppliers who present such material as lawfully sourced. The illegally mined material may enter legitimate refining processes without its unlawful origin being apparent. This could occur if other role players in the supply chain misrepresent the origin of the material, or the unlawfully mined material is mixed with lawful material prior to refining. The refining process itself renders the material indistinguishable from lawfully sourced product, thereby facilitating its integration into the formal market. The proceeds from the sale of the material may then appear to be legitimate income.
General, so here you dealt with an instance where the refinery, the legitimate refinery and processing company is not aware that the material that they are receiving are illegally mined. Are there instances where legitimate refineries and processing companies are aware that they are buying illegally mined material?
Indeed, Commissioners, there is a number of such cases already being dealt with in our courts, or that's currently before courts in South Africa.
Thank you, General. And then insofar as the refining licensing process itself is concerned, is there any involvement there in the organized crime aspect of it, in getting the license issued? So licenses that ought not to be issued are issued to companies.
I do not have any evidence to that effect, Commissioners.
Thank you. Then you say, I now turn to illicit drugs at paragraph 18.
Thank you, Commissioners. Illicit drugs, for purposes of my evidence, are substances that are prohibited by law. Illicit drugs may also be drugs that are lawfully possessed or used under specific conditions, but which are then possessed, used, or distributed unlawfully. My statement deals only with the former. There are essentially two categories of illicit drugs or narcotics: naturally derived drugs and synthetic drugs. Naturally derived drugs are, for instance, dagga, cocaine, and heroin. And I would also like to include here methamphetamine that's originating from Afghanistan. Cocaine is derived from leaves of the coca plant, which is cultivated mainly in South American countries such as Colombia. The leaves are harvested and then processed to extract the substance known as coca paste. This paste is further refined through chemical processes to produce cocaine hydrochloride, which is the form commonly trafficked and sold as cocaine. Heroin is derived from the opium poppy plant, which is cultivated primarily in Afghanistan. The opium is extracted from the poppy plant and then processed to produce morphine, which is further refined into heroin through additional chemical processes. And this is where I also would like to include then the plant-based methamphetamine that originates also from Afghanistan, Commissioners. Cocaine and heroin enter South Africa commonly through established transnational maritime routes involving multiple countries. Cocaine is typically transported from South Africa via West Africa.
South America.
Apologies for that, Commissioners. Transported from South America via West Africa before reaching Southern Africa, while heroin is commonly transported from regions such as Afghanistan through East Africa like Mozambique and into South Africa. These substances are moved using a variety of methods, including air travel couriers, commercial maritime routes, and overland transport. South Africa functions both as a destination for local distribution and as a transit point for further international trafficking. These activities are generally conducted by organized criminal networks operating across national borders. A common method used globally is called the rip-on, rip-off technique. It is essentially hiding drugs inside someone else's shipment in the container when retrieving them before the rightful owner ever knows. The illicit drugs are placed into a legitimately packed shipping container without the knowledge of the lawful consignor or consignee and are later removed from that container at the port or transit point. This method makes use of legitimate cargo to conceal the transportation of drugs. The process requires the trafficking syndicate to identify a legitimate container with a legitimate consignment from a reputable company. Usually an employee or employees at the consignor would be targeted by the trafficking syndicate. The transaction also requires corrupt officials in the source port as well as its final destination. The officials load bulk consignments of contraband in backpacks, baggage and boxes placed preferably at the back of the container. Sometimes a duplicate seal is left inside the container. Should the container be opened, it can be resealed without raising an alarm that the consignment has been tampered with. The rip-off is normally done at its destination. Here again, corrupt officials will break the seal, open the container, remove the contraband, and replace the ripped seal with the duplicate seal that has been placed in the container. In most cases, the port of origin is the port of Santos in Brazil, which is a free port requiring no customs duties from companies using the port. In my experience, in the majority of transactions, the shipper, the forwarding agent, the clearing agent, and the transporter, such as a truck driver, are innocent parties and are unlikely to be aware of any contraband hidden in the container. These parties rely on the information for the legitimate consignment contained in the shipping documents, such as the manifest document, the bill of lading, clearing and transportation documents. Similarly, customs officers will peruse these documents to determine if the consignment is legitimate before releasing the container, none the wiser that illicit drugs have been smuggled into the container. I can perhaps also just here indicate, Commissioners, that SARS Customs do some physical checks on these containers, and then on some of it, obviously not all. And in some instances, they do detect narcotics and then alert the DPCI to the matter for further investigation. I will deal in detail with seizures that occurred in 2020 to 2022, but I want to deal with one seizure to give the Commission a practical example of the method described above.
Thank you, General. Just before you proceed, Commissioners, this is where we're going to flight some photographs just to demonstrate what the General is indicating. Proceed, General.
Thank you. On 30 July 2021, a ton of cocaine, it was in total 999 kilogram bricks, Commissioners, was seized in Durban at the LCS Freight Logistics Depot. The drugs were found at the back of a Scania shipping container containing truck parts. The container's port of origin was the Port of Santos in Brazil. Scania was not aware of the cocaine in the container. The drugs were seized and taken to the Maiden Wharf police station. Prior to the DPCI arriving at the depot, members from border policing visited the company and placed a detention order on the container.
At this stage, show photo 1. So if you can just describe that photo, General.
The photo depicts containers, commissioners, that's offloaded from vessels that docked in the harbor.
And then photo 2.
Commissioners, that is a photo that depicts the consignment of cocaine, or by then suspected cocaine, that was found in the back of the shipping container immediately upon opening the doors.
Before you proceed, you want to ask a question on this? General, can you just explain the role of border policing in exercises such as this? Here you say border policing arrived or got there before the DPCI. Would they have gotten there because of a tip-off, or is this just part of the normal protocols that they
Commissioner, in this specific case, they also received information about the possible narcotics that was hidden in that container, and that is why they arranged for that detention order to be placed on it. So it was just a time lapse, a short time lapse. So obviously their primary responsibility is within the harbour precinct, and then to perform duties within their mandate as border policing.
And in performing, in the normal course of performing that mandate, would they do the kind of inspection that you say, for example, customs randomly does on shipments? I'm just trying to understand practically what, on a day-to-day basis, do they have a role either by protocol or just practice that they could be part of the chain of discovering illegal narcotics, for example?
Commissioner, I do not have detailed knowledge about their roles and responsibilities within that precinct. But it's my experience that whenever there is a search and seizure operation, they are
All right, so this is not the same one?
it's not the same.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, General. Then if I could ask to just show photograph 3.
Commissioner, the photo that's depicted there is of the blocks of cocaine with the logo W or M, depending on how you look at it, that was recovered from one of the bags after the wrapping of that bag was removed.
General, we're going to get to other seizures as well. If you could maybe at this stage just explain to the commissioners the significance of the logos, so that W, or I think it is a W.
Commissioners, there's different logos that's being found on all these seizures. And the explanation for that is that it is the unique mark of certain individuals or a syndicate that's operating within the production space of the cocaine in, for instance, Colombia, that place their fingerprint or their identity to that brick of cocaine. That if there's in future a problem at the final destination, for instance, with the quality, it is clear from where that brick of cocaine is originating.
Because I'm sure they can't have their fingerprints on it and they can't exactly have a note that says, I'm the supplier.
Indeed, Commissioner, and that's why you will also find that there is perhaps multiple suppliers in one consignment that arrives in South Africa. And that's the reason why there will be multiple logos when such consignments are detected and seized.
Thank you, General. If we can go to photograph 4. If you can just describe what we're looking at now.
Commissioners, it's just another photo that depicts towards the bags of containing the cocaine in the back of the container. But I think what's also clear here is that it has handles. And the reason for that handles is to carry it easily. Because when criminals execute a rip-on-rip-off procedure, speed is of essence. You need to remove the exhibits with speed, obviously in the fear of being detected. And that's why it needs to be easy to carry these bags and place it in a vehicle or in a panel van, whatever mode of transport is being used, to then speed away with it undetected.
And then if I could just ask for you, them to zoom in on the orange item there, and if you could just explain the significance of that item.
Commissioners, this is, as I've explained, duplicate seals. So it shows you the criminal network is so sophisticated that they even make provision for a duplicate seal to be placed once the narcotics is removed from the container. So once they've removed the cocaine from the container, they just close the doors and seal it with the duplicate seal. And when SARS, Customs, or the port authorities verify the actual seals with the bill of lading and other documentary evidence or documents that they have in their possession, there will be no suspicion that there was any contraband in that container.
Ms. Sigel-Ncube, I see we are not marking these as exhibits, giving them exhibit numbers. You don't consider that necessary?
We will do so, yes. Chair, as soon as I'm done with all the photographs, then I'll just get the exhibit number as it is now.
All right.
And then I will then place it on the record, Chair.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, arising from this picture, at your paragraph 22, you don't need to go there, General. You, at the end of that paragraph, you say that paragraph 22 on page 8, you say that the rip-off is normally done at destination. Here again, corrupt officials will break the seal, open the container, and I think that's what this photograph is speaking to. Is it necessarily just the officials who can do this, or is there harbor and that arrangement about which I know nothing? such that even private individuals who are part of this plan or scheme can do.
Indeed, Commissioners, that's why I indicated that corruption takes place within both the public and private space. So when we refer here to officials, it does not necessarily mean that it's government officials. It can also include officials working in the harbour or at the depots where these containers get opened and unpacked in some instances, or forwarded by means of road freight. So it goes for both sides.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Mr. Siko.
Thank you. I'm just going to go out of sequence just to show what a seal, an intact seal, looks like, so that the commissioners can see what the significance of the duplicate. If I could ask you to just go to photo 2 of the 22 June photos. That would be the seal that you're referring to.
That's correct, Commissioners.
And so that seal would be removed to gain access to the cocaine, and then the duplicate seal that's been left inside is then used to replace that. Would that duplicate seal have the same barcoding and numbering as the original seal?
Exactly the same, Commissioner. Then that's the mode for them not to be detected, because if the seal number differs, obviously when that container is opened or before it's being opened, the final destination will detect that something went wrong and that the container was opened after it left the port of origin.
Thank you. Then if we can go back to your statement, I think we're on page 10, paragraph 26.
Before you go
My
there,
apologies.
sorry to keep going back, General. What became of this cocaine bust on 30 July 2021? You see, now I've become curious. I hope it didn't go missing as well.
Commissioner Khumalo, can I ask that the General explain its significance later when he gets to the 22 June?
The other
Yes.
one? Okay.
Yeah. There's a reason why he's referring to it, because it's so close in time. Thank you. Proceed, General.
Thank you.
Paragraph 26.
Thank you, Commissioners. Cocaine and heroin are smuggled into the country primarily for the local market, but is also repackaged and for onward trafficking to another country. In other words, the criminal grouping or syndicate in South Africa would assist in repackaging the drugs to make it easier for onward smuggling to another country, usually to Europe. Port authorities are particularly vigilant when vessels arrive from Port of Santos because of the prevalence of drug trafficking from that port. Successful entry into Europe is more likely if the consignment is rerouted to less suspicious countries before onward movement to Europe.
So in this instance, would South Africa be the less suspicious country, or does it go somewhere else from South Africa before it enters Europe?
Well, it depends on the route of the vessel, Commissioners. That will dictate whether there will be stops in between as well.
Thank you. Paragraph 27.
The main trafficking hubs in South Africa are the Durban Harbour, OR Tambo International Airport, and the Lebombo Port of Entry. Bulk imports are mainly through the Durban Harbour. The smuggling via OR Tambo International Airport is primarily by way of people referred to as drug mules who would smuggle the drugs in their luggage or on their person, such as in body cavities. Bulk trafficking through shipping containers is usually undertaken by sophisticated syndicates. Commissioners, I can also just mention here that except for this harbour, the Western Cape Town Harbour, Saldanha Harbour, as well as smaller harbours towards Port Elizabeth and so forth, are all being used to a lesser extent, although for these smuggling and trafficking activities.
Thank you, General. Then can we move on to the next subtopic, which is the synthetic illicit drugs?
Thank you, Commissioners. Synthetic drugs are manufactured through chemical processes rather than derived from natural plant sources. In many instances, since they are not classified as controlled substances in South Africa, the chemicals used to manufacture the drug are sourced through lawful supply chains, but are then diverted or misused for unlawful purposes. Controlled substances are also imported illegally or smuggled into South Africa. The most prevalent synthetic drugs in the country are methamphetamine, known as crystal meth or TIC, methaqualone, known as Mandrax. Synthetic drugs are manufactured at what is referred to as clandestine drug laboratories or CDLs. There are super labs and kitchen labs. Kitchen labs are found in businesses and residential areas, and the equipment used to manufacture the drugs are the readily available equipment such as stoves and other kitchen equipment or appliances.
Sorry, General, before you continue, can I just take you back to paragraph 28 and ask you about the controlled substances that are imported illegally?
Yeah, Commissioners, when it comes to methamphetamine, the controlled substance used there is ephedrine. You get plant-based ephedrine from the ephedra tree in Afghanistan, and then you get the chemicals. Obviously, that's man-made or laboratory-made, and that is then ephedrine as a liquid in a liquid form. And then the active ingredient of methaqualone, of Mandrax, is methaqualone.
And so why is this ephedrine imported or smuggled into South Africa?
It is because it's a controlled substance within South Africa, Commissioner, so you cannot go to any chemical shop and just procure it over the counter. If you need it, obviously there need to be a legitimate reason for that. So, for instance, you are in the medicine manufacturing space, and then obviously you will be able to procure such controlled substances. So it means that the only way to get it into the country is by means of either misrepresentations on the import documents or smuggling activities into South Africa.
Thank you, General. You were busy with super labs.
Super labs are large-scale drug manufacturing operations using specialized equipment and producing drugs in significant quantities. They have extensive infrastructure with specially designed equipment, extraction fans, and reactor vessels. The special equipment is available in the country but is predominantly imported. Super labs are usually found in remote areas, on farms and small holdings. These locations reduce the likelihood that activities such as unusual odors associated with manufacturing of large volumes of drugs, noise or waste disposal will be observed. Once the drugs have been manufactured, they are distributed or disseminated into the market via complex networks. A manufacturer who has a super lab and thereafter distributes the drugs within their own network is referred to as an apex role player or syndicate leader. In July 2024, the DPCI detected and successfully dismantled a super lab on a farm in Groblersdal, Limpopo province, where methamphetamine was being produced. Methamphetamine to the value of approximately 2 billion rand was seized and 5 suspects were arrested.
Before you continue, General, if I could just then put up the photographs to demonstrate the Groblersdal super lab, and you can just tell us what we're seeing. Photo 1.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that photo is depicted the grand scale activities that was taking place on that farm in Groblersdal. What you observe there obviously is the extraction fans, that's the silver equipment that you observe there. Underneath that will be the reaction vessels. So that is where all these chemicals are poured into, it's mixed according to a specific recipe. And then it is placed obviously on top of a burner, a gas burner, and that is why you would see that there's a number of acetylene cylinders on that photo visible. I can see at least 2. And because obviously the reaction vessels need to be heated up over a period of time for the ingredients to come to the final product, which is then methamphetamine or crystal meth.
Thank you. Photo 2.
Commissioner's photo 2 depict more acetylene cylinders. It shows us the extent of the activities that was taking place there, and it also depicts towards an efficient supply chain of equipment. So in addition to the actual manufacturing of the methamphetamine, the individuals involved there was properly prepared in terms of their logistics and the infrastructure that they need to effectively continue with the manufacturing.
Thank you, General. And then photo 3.
Commissioners, what's important here is not to focus on the person. It's not one of the accused. It is within that bucket, the blue drum, you can clearly see the crystals, and that is the final product, the methamphetamine, after it went through all the processes as depicted in the previous photos.
And 4 and then 5.
Photo 4 is just more photos that directs towards the seizure from the crime scene, Commissioners. And there's more evidence of the methamphetamine seized from that super lab, Commissioners.
Thank you, General. And you say it was 2 billion rand worth of
That-
methamphetamine that you refer to as crystal meth or TIC.
That's correct, Commissioners.
And the value of 2 billion rand, how does one get to that value?
Commissioners, there is international best practice within that space because this is transnational crimes in nature. So what we do is that experts within the space regularly also communicate to our counterparts across the globe. And that is how it is determined based on current market prices. What is the value when it is sold off into the markets and into communities.
Thank you, General. Then I interrupted you at paragraph
Maybe
32.
before that, if you could just go back to photo 1. Now, the equipment that is there, if it is not being used here for this kind of activities, is it easily obtainable? What is it ordinarily used for? And is it, and maybe third part of it is it regulated? Who has access legally to this kind of equipment?
Yes, Commissioners, indeed. For instance, the extractor fans are industrially used in a number of industries. For instance, the mining industry. The reason why extractor fans are, for instance, placed there is that the cooks or the individuals involved in this process are not affected by the fumes that's generated by the reaction vessels. So the extractor fans, the burners, as well as the acetylene cylinders is readily available. What is not readily available necessarily is the reaction vessels, because it needs to be a specific vessel that's scientifically developed that will enhance the processes that's being followed by these criminals. So that vessels need to be either manufactured in South Africa or illegally imported with misrepresentations of what it actually is that's being imported.
If it is manufactured, that reaction vessel, if it is manufactured in South Africa, is it, this is its sole purpose, or it does get manufactured and it is used, it is usable legally? I guess what I'm trying to ascertain is whether whether that can be stopped, whether there's, you know, any steps can be taken to make it illegal to manufacture that reaction vessel.
Commissioners, from my own knowledge, these reaction vessels are exclusively used for the illegal purposes. So I'm not aware of any prohibitions to manufacture it, but that's the exclusive use of that portion of the apparatus to get to the final product.
And are you, when I say are you, I mean the authorities, including the SAPS, aware of any manufacturers of these reaction units?
Not in South Africa, Commissioner, okay, but abroad indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I see that it's 11 o'clock now. There are 3 paragraphs left of this topic, but I can deal with it when we return.
Let's adjourn and resume at 11:25. Let's adjourn.